Hello and welcome to another edition of Community Forum. My name is Joseph Feaster. I am the host of the program. And like I oftentimes say, I'm going to bring you important people here in Stoughton who can bring you important news on important issues. And today is the same as always. Now we have three persons that I'm going to introduce shortly who do extraordinary service for us here in the town of Stoughton. So with me today is the Chief of the Stoughton Police Department, Chief Donna McNamara, the Chief of the Stoughton Fire Department, Chief Michael Laracy, and joining us as well is the Assistant Chief, Michael Carroll. So starting with you, Chief McNamara, would you tell our viewing audience about you? I know when you were appointed, we learned a lot, but again, there may be some new residents here in town who may not know you as well. So if you wouldn't mind, talk about your background experiences and your rise to become Chief of the Stoughton Police Department.
Certainly. Thank you for having me. Donna McNamara, Stoughton Police. I was born and raised here in Stoughton, went through Stoughton schools. I graduated from Stoughton High School, then went on and got my associate's degree and then a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. Began my criminal justice career working for the Norfolk County Sheriff's Office for about 4 years as a corrections officer before being hired by the town of Stoughton as a police officer. I have risen through the ranks, holding different levels of rank within the department. I was a detective, sergeant, lieutenant, before being appointed acting chief in 2016 and then permanent chief in 2017. During my time as chief, I have held different executive boards for a nonprofit for FBI Leader since 2018. I also sit on a regional board for Metrolec as an at-large member of the E-Board. And I think we have been involved in a great deal of boards within the community and committees to help move the town forward, such as a traffic unit for the town, as well as worked closely with Chief Laracy and the fire department on a number of public safety issues.
Thank you very much, Chief McNamara. Chief Michael Laracy of the Stoughton Fire Department. Chief?
Thanks, Joe. So I started my fire service career in 1982 as what they call a junior firefighter when I was in high school. Shortly after that, I went to promoted to a call firefighter and started actually full-time in the fire service in 1986. So I have this year, will be 35 years in the fire service. I have already announced my retirement. I've retired back in November. I'm working under an interim contract for the town of Stoughton, which will end on June 30th, at which time my employment with the town will end. And I'll be moving on. To what? I don't know, but I'll be moving on. I've gone through the ranks of firefighter. I got my paramedic, which I still hold, captain, deputy chief, and finally chief. I did 19 years full-time for the town of Foxborough, is my hometown and where I reside. I did 11 years as deputy fire chief in the town of Walpole. And when I retire, it will be just a little over 5 years for the Stoughton Fire Department. In my position as fire chief, I'm also emergency management director for the town. So any events and mainly storm-related events, we're organizing the response, working with other departments, especially DPW and the management of tree removal and stuff like that. So we've been very busy. COVID has been, when you ask what the fire department's been doing.
Well, Chief, you're getting ahead of me. You're taking all my thunder. I gotta listen. I'm gonna have to give you your own show when you retire because you're taking over this one. But why don't you hold those? Because I'm going to go through because I want to get all of that good information from you. But I want them to know a little bit about your assistant chief. So I'll be coming back to you. So Assistant Chief Michael Carroll.
Let me add one thing because I always forget. Married for 27 years, my wife Karen, and 2 kids, Michael and Caitlin, who have been very supportive of me in my fire service career.
Well, I know that you've learned the motto, happy wife, happy life. So I'm glad that you made that announcement. Assistant Chief Michael Carroll.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for having me on. I too I'm born and raised in Stoughton, went through the Stoughton school system. I have a bachelor's degree at Northeastern. I've been on the fire department since 1994. I was promoted in 2001, I believe, to lieutenant. Then I went to the acting captain's position for safety and training. And then I was just recently promoted to this position. It's a fairly new position. I know it's not, I think there have been previous assistant chiefs in the past, but not since like the 1960s or 50s. So I was promoted through a process of interviews and writing assignments, and based on resume to the assistant chief's position is where I sit now. So again, 27, going on 27 years with the Stoughton Fire Department. I have 3 children myself that have come up through the school systems, and 2 have graduated college, and 1 is just starting her first year in college. And I also coach at the high school. I'm the head coach for the wrestling team, which I've been doing for about 10 years now. So yeah, I mean, Stoughton is, you know, then it's part of my life. My father was on the fire department. My grandfather was on Stoughton Fire Department, and both retired here. And my brother is still currently, he's a lieutenant on the fire department.
Well, let me begin just by saying I want to thank all 3 of you and the men and women who served with you for your service. Certainly, it is something which the town could not do without, and you have done it exemplary. And I just want to thank each of you for that. And Chief Laracy, I'm going to say it now so that I don't forget. I just want to say you have given us great service as our chief, and I'm somewhat saddened but happy for you as you go into retirement and as you look at your next career move or retirement move. I just wanted to say on behalf of all of us here in the town of Stoughton, we wish you the best for sure. And I want to say that now. I saw that in the case I forget to say it at the end of the program, but it bears repeating. We just want to say thank you again for your service.
Thank you, Joe.
You know, as Chief Laracy was talking about some of the things that are done, but I want to come to you, Chief McNamara, because I want to talk about the types of calls that you get, the number of calls, and certainly over your career, things probably have changed as far as the types of calls, the number of calls here in the town of Stoughton. And I would like you also to speak about that in this time of COVID. I am sure that since last year, things are entirely different. And Chief Laracy and Assistant Chief Carroll start thinking about, because it's going to be the similar questions to you as well, as you do your EMT work and et cetera. So starting with you, Chief McNamara, can you talk about the types of calls and the number of calls that you experienced for whatever time frame that you want to be discuss?
So I would say that in 2017, really in August of 2016, Chief Laracy and I were tasked with changing some of the scope of our operation with combining our dispatch. That project we worked together on put the dispatchers in the Stoughton Police Station in unifying our call center. I'll touch on the reason I bring that up is because that has had a great impact, having both the police and fire dispatch in the same room when we had to start dealing a year ago with COVID, and the precautions that we took from the time we take a call with the protocols in place that we would necessarily needed to protect our staff, both on the police and the fire, from the time we take the call. Normally, we average between 20 and 23,000 calls for service a year in the police department. Some of that has changed because we had probably 3 months of a lockdown, and calls for service dramatically decreased during that. So for the calendar year of 2020, our calls for service may have declined, but the length in which we were on calls or preparing to go on calls, meaning taking the call, putting on necessary PPE, then responding to the call, and then decontaminating afterwards, had its impact on our calls. They may have declined, but our time on each call extended, and I would think that includes the fire department as well. So during the beginning of COVID, as a dispatcher takes the call, or an officer that's on the desk takes the call, there were a number of questions that our dispatchers were asking all callers for service, whether it be for police response or fire response. We were asking them questions with regards to being out of the country, if there was anybody ill in the household, all in an attempt to protect our staff before they responded to such calls. In many instances, we would have a dual response in the past, but with COVID, we were asking police officers not to go into houses on certain calls, especially if we knew it was mainly an EMS call, to protect the staff from potentially contracting COVID-19. There were a number of protocols that both our departments put in place back in March, and we've had to increase them and pull some of them back. And as we've gotten different restrictions and protocols put in place by the governor's office or the CDC, we've had to sort of be able to change gears as those protocols have changed throughout the year. Our ability to respond to calls they were always there, but during COVID, it was unique that we were asking officers to take the time to put PPE on, eye protection, gloves, masks, really thinking about their response to protect themselves and others with potentially contracting COVID-19. So in the day and age of COVID-19 in the last year, we've been changing gears quite a bit. There were a lot of people that were ordered to stay home. Our staff is essential staff. We've had and still have had a phenomenal response by our staff, our offices, supervisors. They've come to work. They've been here. They've done their job and done it at a very high level during the entire COVID response for our town. We've had high numbers at different points of the year with more positive cases in our town, and I think our departments have worked extraordinarily well together to keep our town safe.
Before I move to Chief Laracy, Chief McNamara, did you have any of your personnel, officers, or administrative staff contract the virus?
Yes, I have. Yep, and we haven't linked any to specifically an incident or a call for service. Most of the contact tracing has been tracked back to things outside of their employment.
Thank you very much. Chief Laracy, same question in terms of what has been the number of calls, types of calls, and I'm glad to hear I remembered about the dispatch thing. I know that was a conversation when I was interim town manager as well about combining it, and it just made imminent sense. But what has been the experience in the fire department from your perspective, both in terms of number of calls, the types of calls, and of course during this era of COVID?
So on average, the fire department does 5,300 runs a year. Of those, probably 66% are EMS related, and the remainder are fire related incidents. During COVID, what we saw a switch in those numbers. Because when people at the beginning, they weren't calling for an ambulance. A lot of them weren't going to the hospital. You could see, the decline in, the amount of patients in hospitals. So we started answering more fire-related calls. And the reason for that is, after doing some research, is the amount of people that were home, whether they're working from home or they weren't working, the kids are home. We get a lot of calls for cooking, from alarms going off from cooking, just incidents like that, a lot of calls like that. So we kind of swapped for a little while, from probably March to about July. And then we started picking up again with our EMS calls. So I want to stress too, like Chief McNamara, I mean, when you look at essential employees in any job, and we're going to talk about the town of Stoughton, there was no one more essential in this town during this pandemic, and continues to be so important, is our public safety personnel. We have asked of them at the beginning that all we wanted is you come to work on your days you're supposed to work, and we promise that we'd do the best we could to protect you from this pandemic, from this COVID, which at the beginning we knew nothing really about. And we also made them a promise too that, from us protecting them, helping to protect them, that, we'll watch out for their family as well. So it continues to be, and it was, especially towards the beginning, very stressful for these employees. stressful as far as, mental health, worrying about their exposures, because they were absolutely exposed on almost every call they went on in the ambulance. Especially when we started picking up calls, people were calling us again. But we put a number of emergency policies in place, response policies, responded to COVID incidents, as well as the police department did, and especially related to PPE. We limited our contact to patients from one of our personnel. So it didn't matter the call, because at that time, everyone was assumed to have COVID. And every call, we were assumed to be exposed. Okay, in most cases we were. So limited our contact through our policies. One individual would go in, make patient contact. That patient contact was from 6 feet away. Certain questions were asked, especially, how they were feeling, what symptoms they had. And based on that, it would let the rest of the crew know whether they had to fully get into their PPE to assist in this patient care, or if this patient could actually, walk out of the house, which most times we wanted them to, because by removing the patient, if capable of, leaving their house, it limits our exposure to other family members that could potentially have COVID as well. So they did an extremely great job throughout this process. They adhered to our emergency policies, which were always updated, always added to, their exposure at the station, which was, we tried to limit, the gatherings between personnel, try to keep them separated. With our stations, that's hard to do. They had to wear a mask, everything, all the time, unless they were separated from each other. So a lot of those policies, and it leads up to the question you asked the chief, Joe, did we have COVID, people that came down with COVID? We did. But what we found is all of them, got COVID through an outside source. So which told us that, we were doing a great job limited inside. So when you think about the number of patients we saw throughout the year and continue to see, and not one of our personnel, received COVID on the job, knock on wood, we determined that most, the 6 or so we had were from the outside. That says a lot for our personnel. It says a lot for our staff, our offices, making sure that they maintain to the policies. We determined through town, working with Janice, working with Chief McNamara, that we had a number of hotspots. And those hotspots were nursing homes, assisted living complexes. And we knew, going into there, that our personnel getting on scene fully PPE. And let me tell you what that means, for the viewers. That is a gown, that is gloves, that is an N95 mask, and it's also a face shield when they have patient contact. So doing those things limited our exposure. When we did have exposures, we rated them from low, medium to high, and that determined if someone needed to be quarantined and out for 14 days. So in our quarantine guidelines and I'm trying to think, quarantine and isolation guidelines were exactly the same between departments, because we worked daily between the police department, fire department, public health with Janice Bruce and her crew, which were awesome. And I'll finish with Joe saying that back to the dispatchers. I mean, they're our first line of defense. They're the ones who are asking the callers, the patients, these questions, and they're giving us the heads up, whether we're walking into a potential exposure. So we know ahead of time, what level of PPE. And now, working with Janice Bruce throughout the past year, and we continue to do it. We track every single COVID positive case in town. And by doing that, they're put into the dispatch system. So they know if we're responded to a COVID residence, and the dispatchers notify us. So we're given the heads up. So this has been a team effort. You between dispatch, police, fire, public health, no one has been more essential 24/7 throughout this whole COVID event. And we
Thank you,
continue to
Chief.
be.
Thank you,
I give
Chief
them credit.
Laracy. In fact, I recently had Janice Bruce on the show,
Yep.
and we talked about a lot of that. And I know this triumvirate in terms of the police, fire, and public health are so important during this pandemic. Assistant Chief Carroll, I'm glad to see you're a Husky. I'm a double Husky, and Northeastern. Coming here from New York and coming here back to the first class of the College of Criminal Justice at Northeastern. So, and then from the law school. So I always like to see my Huskies and to meet them. I know Chief Laracy has covered the landscape, and so there may be some additional things that you may want to fill in, but I'm going to come to you as well to an issue that's near and dear to me, and I know that Chief McNamara knows this, and that is in the area for persons who are experiencing mental health crises. And I'm going to come, to you to talk about that, to address some areas that you feel that you want to amplify from what Chief Laracy said. And then I'm going to come to you with that question about the mental health responses as well, Chief McNamara, once Assistant Chief Carroll will respond. So you have the floor, Assistant Chief.
So, just to add a little bit to Chief Laracy's, because I was, I guess, fortunate or unfortunate, depending on how you want to look at it, I'm coming off the line, the front line as far as responding to these with for the calls. And there's a lot. So in the beginning of COVID, nobody really knew what was going on. So there was a lot of confusion. So it was a huge learning curve for us, because we've all been here when, there was, a question of like an Ebola breakout and in the country, and there was like 1 or 2 patients and you didn't know what COVID was going to be. So, we kind of like, okay, we've been here before, whether it's that or whether it's anthrax, there's always types of things that we, had prepared for in our head. If we had to deal with, we would consider it almost like a hazardous material response, where we send in an observer to look at it, make sure they're protected, and then we were kind of stand by and what did they need. But then as this crew, our response had to change, and it was real all of a sudden. And then when Stoughton, I think it was top 10 in the state at one time with COVID positive patients, it really kind of, okay, we really need to slow down and make sure we're protected. And then at the same time, make sure that the patients and the community is protected. So that was tough. And all unresponsive calls, whether it be a cardiac arrest, an overdose, or whatever, had to be handled as a positive patient, because we didn't know otherwise. And then it was all, and then of course our shifts are a little bit different than the police, where we are on 24-hour shifts. So now we're being asked to wear a mask constantly in the firehouse, change to an N95 going out on calls if it was positive and or unresponsive. And I don't know about you, but sometimes I walk around Home Depot with that mask. I cannot wait to get outsiders to take it off and breathe for a little bit. So the confines of putting that on and working all day like that, you talk about, and I understand you want to talk about mental health, but the mental drain it put on us and puts on, all first responders is, that's just an added layer. The other thing is, okay, am I going to bring this home to my family? I was, again, like Chief Laracy said, we were doing a real good job here, and we continue to do a good job because none of our members have been tested positive from an exposure with patient contact or otherwise. I mean, if you think about it, we put them in the ambulance, we're going into these facilities, finding out some of the facilities have COVID floors, and sometimes they don't even tell our dispatch this. So we're walking in, and thank God we prepare as we walk into these facilities. But then do we bring it home to our families? Actually, all 3 of my children ended up getting it through contact. So now, not to do with me or this job, but now I had to isolate for 2 weeks at home through contact tracing. So now it put another burden on the fire department, because now I can't go to my shifts. So there's 24 hours plus if they held over mandatory on overtime. Now there's added stress. Some people live with, their in-laws or their parents live at home with them, or an in-law, so they're going to expose them. So there's a lot that went on here. Of course, Chief Laracy and Chief McNamara talked about the actual response, but then, okay, how does that affect us? And trying to, okay, we're going to be good as long as we take these precautions. So there was that added. There was another thing that I noticed, and both chiefs talked about dispatch, but what we were finding is some people were afraid to tell dispatch that they either tested positive or they were exposed, and because it was almost, they were afraid of that. One, maybe we wouldn't respond. I'm not exactly sure why they'd have that thought, or how they would be treated, because there was an unknown. They didn't realize so many people would end up testing positive, but they almost were afraid to tell dispatch, which dispatch couldn't relay that to us. So again, you really had to have your head on a swivel. You had to be prepared for almost everything. So that was another added thing. It's been something we're constantly learning about. The education we've had to go through just to kind of keep up, through our medical control doctor, the classes that we take, the rounds, everything's through Zoom now. And the members have been real good about that. Constant FAGO reports from Lieutenant McNamara coming down on where are we at as far as the state, as far as the town, as far as the country. And then again, through the leadership here, being able to partner with Sharon and become vaccinated was another layer of protection for everyone, and much needed. Really doesn't stop the way that we wear our PPE and go into and respond to these calls. You got to remember, these paramedics and whatnot, not only are they going into a COVID positive unit, but then you're in the back of the ambulance, isolated, in the middle of the winter, which is really hard to ventilate. It's not like you can put the windows down. I mean, it's sub-zero temperatures, and now then we have to put the ambulance in, and sanitize it afterwards, and that holds an ambulance up. So now we're asking for mutual aid or some other response if we need them. So there was a lot to deal with. I think we've done a great job. Again, the fact that we've had no members test positive from patient contact is huge. I mean, it's great.
Well, I think I can see that in terms of you have a comprehensive approach there, Assistant Chief Carroll, in that, and and again, it just underscores what I already felt. Now, our viewing audience has the facts to back that up. But let me shift to you, and on the question, Chief McNamara, I want to shift to you because I do want to address this issue of mental health, and I also want you, if you would, to give viewers the types of cases in terms of, between traffics, between criminal cases, homicides, and, so if you would just give a snapshot of that, but focusing on the question of what is the mental health protocol that the Stoughton Police Department has. And then Chief Laracy, I'm going to come to you basically with similar question about the protocol for handling mental health patients and the types of calls that you may have gotten over the past year or beyond. So Chief McNamara.
So I would say that we've had an increase of at least a third more of our calls have a component of mental health. We're seeing a number of people over the last year, the COVID protocols and being out of school and Zoom meetings and people working from home, just all the different things that we've all experienced and had to go through has had its toll on all individuals. And then add those that have mental health concerns, it is probably multiplied for them as well. Over the years, we've taken a lot of classes for mental health and responses to mental health individuals. That component is always very volatile. We do, as a police department, work with the fire department, and we've done sections to the hospital as police officers, and then the fire department transports if they're a danger to themselves or others. In that sense, that we've done that a number of times. We wouldn't be able to accomplish those protocols without the fire department and the assistance from the fire department. We've seen a lot of younger individuals with mental health issues and concerns. We've had a number of suicides, unfortunately, in the town over the last year that our officers have responded to, and some of them have taken a toll on the response by our officers that responded to those scenes. We've had youth, unfortunately, have greatly impacted and their lives completely changed in the way they attend school. And that has had a negative impact in a lot of ways. And I know that we have youth services programs in the town that have also assisted to try and reach out to them. Our school resource officers early on when kids were home all the time, starting last year in the spring, our school resource officers were identifying with the school staff some of the most vulnerable students and trying to check in with them during that time last spring. And then when they came back part-time on different schedules, half of the students were trying to do the same. And it's been amazing to watch the school resource officers and what they've been able to accomplish with only having some of the students in their collaboration and work with the school system to identify and keep an eye on those students that need maybe a little extra attention. They've done some classes as well online for recreational marijuana use and different protocols that they've been able to put out as an educational forum on a Zoom platform. If you haven't seen that, I know Stephanie Patton and Julie Miller from the high school and our school resource officers put some protocols and classes together to not only educate the students, but also to educate the staff, the employees, and the teachers what to be looking for. A lot of protocols that were going on in schools as far as not allowing multiple kids in bathrooms and sort of different things to look for. Has been something that our school resource officers have also been a part of. We did have a homicide last summer, which was has been solved. There are a number of indictments in that homicide that took place right next door to the library, and we've had a number of some violent calls for service. We just had a shooting last week that's still currently under investigation, and early on in COVID, if you can remember back a year ago, we were having not only the town of Stoughton, we had a number of armed robberies to convenience stores, but there was actually a little bit of a task force put together because they were hitting a number of communities in our area, and police departments worked together to identify suspects, and some of the investigative work done by our detective unit helped to target and locate the suspects that were hitting those convenience stores and get indictments on robbery suspects. We've had a number of major incidents as well as the normal everyday as traffic and the state opened back up. We began to see one of the good and bad things about there being less traffic out there was the high level of speed that was happening. Because there were less cars on the road. Now we've seen a little bit more accidents and more severe accidents because people were driving faster with less traffic. As school has started to open back up this past week, we've tried to take precautions with the traffic flow in all the schools. We had an election yesterday, and that's the first time we've actually, with COVID, all the students are back in school, and we were introducing the public to the schools where there were election polls, and we took extra precautions I met with the superintendent and the town clerk to make sure that we had as many precautions in place to keep the students safe, the staff safe in the schools, as well as those coming in to vote.
Thank you very much, Chief. Just one quick follow-up on that. I know, at least in Boston, where I spent used to prior to last year, quite a bit of my time. They have mental health professionals that oftentimes will accompany police officers to situations when they have been advised that there is maybe a mental health crisis. Do we have that type of protocol here in the town of Stoughton?
So there have been times when we've had, whether it's been someone that we've had in custody experiencing a severe mental health episode, we have been able to and have the ability to call Brockton Multi Health and get a response from them to respond. But with the crisis that's been going on over the last year, it's been difficult to get them to actually respond out to the scene. We've had people in the past in our custody having an episode, and they'll send out a social worker or they'll send out a physician to our station when we've had them in custody. They do an evaluation, and if they deem that they need to go to the hospital, then we take the appropriate steps to get them into a hospital, whether that's bailing them on personal recognizance and then sending them to the necessary medical facility that they need to go to. As far as going to homes, we do not have a psychologist on scene on our payroll, so to speak. We have not been able to accomplish that as of yet. But we do have the ability to call in Brockton Multi-Services.
Well, I think as a citizen of the town, I think I'm going to have to raise that issue at one of the select board meetings, because I think that's essential. The increase in the mental health crises that are occurring, I think that's an important addition to the work of both what you do and the fire department. But Chief Laracy, I'm going to come to you on the same thing in terms of the mental health protocol that the fire department has, and anything about the different service calls that you may want to speak to. But you're on mute right now, and I just wanted to make sure that our viewing audience can hear you.
Perfect. Thank you for reminding me of that. I want to first start with, the mental health counselor that will be available to the town. We've had that discussion. We've had that conversation with the town manager, and we truly see the need in both departments to have someone on the payroll, someone available that we can utilize in mental health crises, because, especially for us, it's a specialty, and, our training is limited on that. When Chief McNamara gave her overview of the mental health crisis, the responses, we really get involved in more in a support function. We're called in, the police department is usually there first. They're getting the calls. They're working with these individuals. And then at some point, there's times when they call us to transport. So that's when we're getting involved. And really our role is empathy. We're transporting these individuals that are experiencing issues, whether, depression from whatever the case may be, substance abuse, or suicidal thoughts. And we're transporting them to the hospital so they can get these resources. But what we need in town is we need an individual that has these connections to the resources. So it's different. The resources are different for from a child to an adult, different agencies that you can contact. We do have counselors in town. We do have available, Riverside, but, they have their specialties. They focus on their age, on the age groups that they deal with. We deal with elder affairs when we're dealing with issues with that elderly. So we have seen an increase in mental health responses, and we've actually seen them well before COVID. Because we've had these conversations, and getting back to your point, Joe, and we need people like yourself to stress the need in town to have that type of individual, that type of position that benefits all departments as a resource. So, to sum up this, we play mainly a support role with the police department, who does a great job, and yes, there is that need. And we're seeing it, and we're seeing it more, through overdoses. At one point in COVID, they really slowed down for whatever reason, and thankfully they did. But now we're starting to see them pick up again, and suicide attempts or suicide thoughts becoming a regular on a regular basis that we're seeing that. So these are things we need to address, but we need the expertise available to us to help to assist us.
Well, let me just assure you, I am very much involved in that space. I sit as on the advisory council for Samaritans. I'm an executive committee in the Mass Association of Mental Health, and I have worked with NAMI, the National Alliance for Mental Illness. So, and as you may or may not know, in terms of I suffered a suicide death with my son. It'll be 11 years on August 3rd. So I'm in that space, and you can rest assured that I'm going to bring this issue to the forefront, because I think that professional going along with your personnel would be helpful. And I think there needs to be more than just one individual, and they can look at the team that I'm familiar with in Boston is the best team. And I'm sure that those of you on here are familiar with the best team. And so there are models. And I think that if we're going to spend money to help our citizens here in town of Stoughton, that's an area where both the police and fire department can use that support. So you can rest assured that I'm going to be there. Assistant Chief, anything to add to that conversation, or can I throw another issue at you?
Just one thing. I think that what you're saying is a great, if we can find a model. But I will say, from way back when I came on till now, I think the police have definitely, and I'm not exactly sure what education they've got, but they're able to just de-escalate a lot of these. And it's not just a matter of de-escalating a violent patient and or who they come across, but even someone dealing with mental illness. I think being able to recognize it a lot quicker and then getting the resources that they need has, really come forth. I know mental health issues, depression and whatnot are up. I think Dr. Musa brought medical control doctor told me their ER went from 11%, which they typically dealt with, up to almost over 41, 45% now they're dealing with. So I think we're on the right track, but of course, having a professional there, which is not always easy to get, as Chief McNamara had said, is really difficult, especially in these times. So that's all I'll add. And yeah, you can hit me with another question.
Okay, well, I'm going to throw this one out too, because this has been a burning issue for me, even during the time, and even my predecessor as the town manager had it as well, and it's still a burning issue with me, and that is the deplorable conditions that are at Station 1 for you at the fire department. I've oftentimes said, as an attorney, I would like to represent the men and women over there against the town for the type of deplorable conditions, but I'll leave that for the union issue. I'll stay out of that particular fight. But as well, there are other resources, even with you, Chief McNamara, in terms of the station that you have on Rose Street is inadequate. And Chief Laracy, the new station that was built on Central Street is, again, is not meeting the needs of what you need. And there's discussions of trying to have a public safety building. So, I'm going to give any one of you starting out an opportunity to speak about that at the level and to the extent that you wish. But I just want to say, as a citizen of the town and having been a town official, we need to do something to make sure that the facilities that are there for the police and fire department are adequate for the services that you provide for the town. So maybe I'll start with you, Chief McNamara, and then Chief Laracy, and then to Assistant Chief Carroll.
Well, I think, Chief Laracy and I think it's been 3 years now, Chief, that we've been tasked with different levels. At one point, it was Town Manager Hartman that we first began looking at projects, sitting down and doing surveys of our departments and the needs assessments for each of our departments as far back as 2017. We've brought a number of things forward, and it's been difficult. A year ago, we were asked to do a feasibility study for a public safety building. We worked diligently, both police and fire, with some of our staff to put a format together, and that was about to be presented. We were working towards that for last town meeting in May and June of 2020, and we were working quite well for a program to bring forward, and then COVID hit, and dramatically things changed for us. Everything was put on hold for quite some time, and then we started back with it in the fall. And due to the uncertainty, the economic uncertainty, there were things that were going on that was influencing, the thought process of, where the finances would come from to fund everything. We've shown the need for police and fire, obviously the fire department, and the deplorable conditions would not insult any of the firefighters and the fire staff personnel that our building on 26 Rose Street is anywhere near what their building is for Freeman Street. We just our station was a remodel. They remodeled our station in 1998, and they just didn't build for the future of what our town would be 20 years later. And we're busting at the seams with what we have for a facility. We, as an organization, have done a good job maintaining the conditions of our building. We've been fortunate enough to have upgrades, such as, we had an HVAC system that was completely upgraded when we did our central dispatch. The central dispatch construction project brought some improvements, but also took space away from other areas when we expanded the dispatch. Again, I'm not going to insult the fire department. They're in some pretty tough conditions. We're just running out of space, and as our department has expanded, the space that we're in just doesn't meet our needs right now or the needs for the future of our department. And again, we were asked, and from a public safety building committee back in December, that we saw that the best option for the town and the right thing for the town to do was to move forward with just the fire station at one point. We began to move forward with that as a public safety building committee. And, the option of where that goes and the best response time for the fire department has all been part of the debate on a piece of property on where to put a building for them. Now that's sort of changed again, looking at other pieces of property amongst within the town to maybe go back to building a fire station with the ability to add on for a police station. That's even a fourth option that's being talked about now. So.
Well, Chief, let me move to Chief Laracy for a moment, because folks, I'm just going to let you know I have about 10 minutes of the show, and I knew that we could probably go on for more than that with the three of you because there's so much to talk about. But Chief, I know about some of the issues that are under discussion about the location of a possible fire department, or whether they have a public safety facility which combines the police. But I know one of the pressing issues in making that determination is the response time, such that you can have the coverage or the response time for throughout the town, both north and south. So looking at that, I know that there's the Land Rover site, there is the armory that's being discussed, and I don't know what else third or fourth option may be. What say you about what your experience, and you can always speak freely because you're leaving in June, is going to be the assistant chief that's going to have to bear the brunt of what you say. But you're leaving in June, and what would be your recommendation if the funding was there, and what was best for the men and women that are in your employ?
So one good thing about this whole process, the public safety building, as we've been going through, is there's no doubt, everyone knows there's a need to replace Station 1. I mean, Station 1 was built in 1926 at a price of $55,000. It was built for a predominantly call fire department and apparatus at the time that was probably, a third of the size of what we have now. The building, we've outgrown that building many years ago. With this committee, with this feasibility study, we looked at a number of sites. We looked at a number of private sites just by looking at the town GIS where we could fit a fire station. We put out a request for proposals for anyone that had land 3 to 5 acres and would be willing to maybe entertain selling it to the town for public safety. And we got no responses from that. So we started looking at other properties in town that the town owned, and one of them was the Armory. And we kept going back to what we actually kept going back to, Joe, is Fannel Drive. Okay, because with our response time analysis that was done by a private consultant for this feasibility study, they showed that putting a station up in that area of town would be the best response time for all citizens. Okay, and when I look at it is, the percent of, where we can get in 2 minutes, where we can get in 4 minutes, 6 minutes, 8 minutes, and so on. In that whole area, Fannel Drive kept coming up. And Fannel Drive has come up on the last 2 feasibility studies. I know the last one, they were going to move forward with putting something before town meeting for Fannel Drive. Come to find out that, it was deeded way back when for school property only. So the selectmen decided to remove that site. The school committee first said no, that, they at this time, without knowing what they had coming down the road, they couldn't say, yeah, we could utilize that partial site for a public safety building. And the selectmen took a vote to move on to another site, which really left us with the Armory. And as you say, I'm leaving. And I was never comfortable with that site, because when I talked about the 2, 4, 6, 8 minute response times, the 2 minute response times to the majority of the town were just not acceptable to me as fire chief. And I didn't think it was acceptable to the committee to recommend that. And ultimately what we did is we didn't move it forward to this spring town meeting because we weren't comfortable with that site, and mainly due to the response time. In the meantime, we had some property people approach the town that it might be available. And to be honest with you, if it comes true, it would be probably the best site that we actually had of everything we're looking at. It will give us the best response time. I'll be a happy little guy if that's the case, if that comes true, which will be up to the assistant chief to move that forward, the torch. Stoughton's got to get a fire station. I'm going to tell you why. Because when I was in Foxborough, right after I left, they built a new fire station.
Yes.
When I was in Walpole, right after I left, they built a new fire station. So I am doing the members of this fire department justice by leaving, because I guarantee you, if that site comes available, that they'll be before town meeting and a special town meeting in the fall. And I don't see how this town cannot support a new fire station.
Well, I gave you that softball, Chief, because you are leaving, because I wasn't going to do that, because I'm hopeful that I believe I forgot whether it's the selectman or either the town manager selects the chief. I can't remember which one, but hopefully it'll be your Assistant Chief Carroll. Assistant Chief Carroll, do you have something to add to that discussion around the location?
Well, the location actually, yeah, no, for sure. The response times are essential for not only the community, but also for the safety of the members. Some people might not understand what response times means to us, but it also means to them. You know, if it's a cardiac arrest, there's 4 minutes before the brain starts to die. There's 6 minutes before the body comes, before we really have a chance to fully revive somebody. Fires grow, especially with the new construction. Fires grow, I think they double in size every 4 minutes. So, you know, by the time we get the call, by the time we get out the door, by the time somebody sees it and reports it, you know, who knows where that fire is. And that's how vital it is. It's vital for, you know, any type of life safety on both ends, the first responders and the community themselves. So, you know, some people might say, oh, what's a minute? What's 2 minutes? Well, that's the difference. It really is. And so if we can find something where this station and station 2 can cover portion and then it overlaps a little bit with where the new station goes and we're able to really cover the community. I mean, I guess that's how important it is. And Mr. Feaster, you might not remember, I'm not sure, but just you were town manager, and just as you were, you sat down with, actually, I sat down with you upstairs at Station 1 when you really wanted to do some repairs there. I don't know whether you remember that, and we needed it then. And I spent, you know, 26 years in that building, and you know, we kept putting Band-Aids on it, you know, and we can't do it anymore. We certainly. As a coach, I used to have my practices around trash barrels collecting water. Well, I worked in that same condition for a lot of time where we have buckets on the floors and stuff. And as many times as we do that roof, it just continues to leak. And
I do recall that visit, and I know there were some repairs that were made, as you said, the Band-Aid. And I raise this issue each and every time about the Freeman Street Station 1. I will continue to raise it until such time as this town addresses it. So I want to do that. But I have about 4 to 5 minutes, and I just want, you're going to have to touch this issue and move on. I didn't want to leave it as if it's not unimportant. But I'm concerned about diversity in the town in both across the board, but in terms of in fire and in police. You're going to have about maybe a minute and a half or 2 minutes to talk about where it stands, what it is you're doing in the department. And I'm going to be the taskmaster. The fact that I have all the chiefs here, et cetera, I'm going to have to be the chief of this show and monitor the time, because I have another chief called Roy Cohen that I have to adhere to. So therefore, Chief McNamara, starting with you, Chief Laracy, and then of course to you, Assistant Chief Carroll.
Well, let's start off with our diversity within our department is not significantly high enough. We are a civil service community with our police department, and we hire through our civil service, and that has come under scrutiny. We are a town that's involved in the remap, and that's been a discussion of remap is maybe leaving civil service, which has its challenges as well. Mr. Feaster, I'm sure you're well aware about those challenges to leave with the unions, but we are currently in the hiring process again, and we are hoping to recruit some more people that are willing to do police work. And there is a police officer exam, another civil service police officer exam come June, and I hope that people will sign up and take the exam.
Thank you, Chief Laracy, and to you as far as the police, the fire personnel.
Yep. So I agree with Chief McNamara. We're not close to being there where we should be as far as diversity in our fire department. With a SAFER grant where we hired 8 a few years ago, we diversified a little bit. We brought on 2 females that have been working out awesome. With the Norfolk County Fire Chiefs, we're putting together a video, and it's and I've seen it. We've had 2 of our members here to take part in it. And it's really promoting the fire service in Norfolk County, and it's promoting diversity. And I think when that comes out, that's going to be great. Chief Carroll has been working with REMAP as a representative for the fire department. He's working with the school department. He can talk about that. I don't want to steal his thunder. Working through civil service, I mean, we get a candidates list and we go by the candidates list, and then sometimes we don't even get Stoughton residents on it. So the last two we did, well, at least the last one, which was great, but many times we don't. And our list is not, the civil service list of candidates is not diversified, and it needs to be. And that's where we're working. Chief Carroll is on certain things in town. I want to give him the time while we're running out.
Thank you, Chief Laracy. So, it's interesting because I just had a meeting yesterday. I had this thought that, there's really not much we can do to change civil service right now. But what I did was I met with a guidance counselor at the high school yesterday, and what I'm trying to do is, what I don't think people understand is the process. We hire paramedics over here in Stoughton. So when you have to take the civil service exam, you have to be a paramedic. So my thought was this: not as many kids are going to college. What they're doing is either more certificates, and not college isn't for everybody. The military is not for everybody. So even by looking at some of my the kids on my team, do they know the process? And I don't think that they do. We want to actually work with the schools, maybe get a hold of some seniors that present what the fire department does, and then also outline a path for them to get on the fire department. That would be, set up the process as they're 18 years old, get their EMT, and maybe we can get a grant, get some scholarships for them to go to EMT school instead, and then come over here and shadow us maybe a couple times and work with them and mentor these kids. And so what we do, you keep the retention on Stoughton Fire. You did diversity. There's a lot of kids in Stoughton that don't understand the process. So educate them on the process and then assist them through the process. Get them their EMT. Tell them, hey, listen, now you got to go to medic school. So maybe there's some scholarship money there to get you to medic school. And then if you're a resident and you're a paramedic on civil, and then take the civil service exam, you're going to go to the top of the list. Okay. And so if we can do that, and just the diversity of the students alone is going to bring up the diversity within our department, at least, and so that's where I was yesterday, and trying to, I've had some good feedback, and we're going to continue this process, and hopefully we can start it before the next school year, or in time for the next school year.
Assistant Chief, I know I'm going to wrap, and I know I'm going to get the sign from Roy very, very shortly. So I want to do a number of things. One is I served on the Police Reform Task Force for the City of Boston, and there's some recommendations that came out of that may be something to look at. We talked about the civil service question, and we set aside for students who went to Boston Public Schools. And so there may be some things such as that can happen. I pressed that the town have an affirmative action policy and plan, which will help with some of the recruitment and where they may look for candidates. So there's a lot that can be done, and I'm willing to sit and impart some of that knowledge in that regard. But the three of you have just been great today. First and foremost, Chief Laracy, I know I'll probably see you around town, at least from a distance under COVID, to be able to tell you congratulations and wishing you all the best in your retirement. I want to thank you. I want to thank you, Chief McNamara, Assistant Chief Carroll. Hopefully you will be the chief come July 1 in that regard. I want to thank Roy Cohen and all of Michael Hammond and all of the folks at SMAC who allow me to be the host of this particular program. So again, I want to thank all of you for being here today. It's been a robust discussion and an informative one, and to learn that, just as I expected, the great work that your men and women that work for the three of you are getting the job done, and that we who live here in Stoughton can benefit from all of the great work that you do. So Godspeed, stay safe, and I will see you around town.
Thank you,
Thank
Joe.
you.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.